Yes, first a comment. I see a future completely different than yours over the next 5 years. I see the so-called constitutionalization of multi-stakeholder models and processes in all the initiatives that we see. And I think, secondly, I would like to say that the ITU is doing their job in frequency and space allocation of other things rather than running the internet. But let me ask Paul if he's got a different view.
Well, I tend to agree with you a little bit. What I have to say, and actually those of you in the room that know me probably know I'm quite an optimist, and I am trying to look at this thing a little bit, with a view of a bit of an optimistic view. But I actually have the feeling that about 5 years from now, anywhere from 5, definitely within 10, we're going to see a change in this space, and we are probably going to see governments taking a bit of a bigger role here. Am I afraid that it's going to be the ITU? In fact, we work together with the ITU. I think, again, ITU is probably a very bad word inside the RIPE community when it came out, because we probably didn't even understand what our relationship with them was supposed to be. And they looked like this big monster that had all the governments behind them wanting to come and take over all these internet functions and pull them all inside of the ITU. And they did do that, and they did try that. They're still trying that. But does that mean that we don't work with them in cooperation? We do actually cooperate with them very nicely. They believe that that's the space that this needs to work in. Now, my belief, after all of these years of working in this internet governance circus or arena, so to speak, is that the ITU doesn't have what it takes to keep up with this ecosystem. And I think governments understand that as well. So I'm not afraid that this will all end up inside of the ITU. But what I am concerned about is that I think that there's going to be some kind of body, and I don't know what that is, inside of either the UN or I'm not really quite sure what process, that's going to take a little bit more of a bureaucratic approach to this multi-stakeholder effort that we've seen here. I think that we've had our time to understand. I think, this is something that's very new, this space. I mean, think about, back in the day when the Industrial Revolution came about. They were having all kinds of weird spaces and discussions going on, things about health and safety and, what was going on when industries were being built and what have you at that time. It took them quite some time, but they got all the governance sorted out and everybody knew where their place was. I think the space that we're sitting in right now is very similar. Everybody's running around trying to understand where they fit, but sooner or later there's going to have to be something probably a little bit more bureaucratic. I think what the technical community needs to fight for is that bureaucratic model that's going to exist there has some kind of multi-stakeholder inclusion so that there is space for us to be somehow showing the road for what we want to see in how it's being governed. So I don't think it's as simple as maybe what Vlada is saying. And because, and look at this, isn't this funny? Like, if you look at different ways, the way that governments kind of make public policy or whatever, inside of this space, and it's probably because they didn't know what they were doing, governments would never have let something like this happen if they were in control of it. Multi-stakeholder and other people kind of coming in. They don't operate like that. They're not comfortable with it at all. Even after these 10 years or more than 10 years of kind of the multi-stakeholder model, those governments are still tripping over all of the different ways that we're supposed to cooperate with each other. They cannot get their heads around this, right? So I think the fact that we've even had these 10 years of kind of open discussions or whatever tells you a lot. Actually, it's not only a top-down approach, and I think that if they tried to only make it a top-down approach, I think that ship has sailed for purely top-down approach, right? I think it's sailed. So I think that something will come in the next 5 to 10 years, and it will definitely be more bureaucratic, and we will have less say there. But I think we have to fight for the pieces that we can there. That's my take on this.
Thank you, Paul. I'd like to say that if you have a question, you can also tweet it with a hash SEE, and maybe it's good to stand in line, and there are 2 mics aside, because if anyone has comments, we can have that further. I'd like to point out the results of a survey that have indicated that 75% of majority of users would actually prefer a multi-stakeholder organization working together with the technical community. And that's the survey that's been done with the Center for International Governance Innovation, CIGI. It's a recent survey. And also the biggest concern of internet users today is online privacy. And we know with a certain events that have happened a couple of years ago that users are actually losing confidence in the structures that are run by governments because of the overall censorship and mass surveillance and what we've seen. Yes, we have a question. Please go ahead.
My name is Jan George. I come from Slovenia. So I'm traveling all around the world and talking to the operators. And, you know, historically the operators were building and architecting and running the internet, and that was their business, trying to make money out of it. And now all of a sudden they start hearing this internet governance and all the politics that, you know, it's quite new for them. And they're asking me, what is the impact of all this? And, you know, what is this giving to us? Are they keeping away the regulators? What is these people doing, right? So do we have any simple and short explanation for the operators? What does the governance brings in for them? How does it affect their job, their work, and why they should get involved?
Thank you, Jan, for that question. I'm supposed to be working, right? Anybody wants to have a go at answering Jan's question?
Well, again, with my governance hat. So if, firstly, when you engineers made the internet, you didn't have an idea that it's going to be what it is now. And I guess we can all agree on that. So it was built on trust. Currently, it goes well beyond what was initially envisaged. And currently, we have a lot of interest from different sides to misuse it. Criminals, even states, even activist groups with defacements, attacks, and so on. So there is something that needs to be done on a policy level, along with the engineers trying to kind of patch the system and provide more security or privacy by design or whatever. But there is also a need for the government system to protect the citizens. That simply goes hand in hand. The whole set of events around the world, the flying circus of the internet governance, if it was only the governments, it would probably be easier because the governments already have system they work in. With a multi-stakeholder system, it might actually become more complex because you have IGF, which comes out with no results. And even the governments don't like it. There is an IGF, Internet Governance Forum, which comes in with no kind of a recommendation, policy paper, whatever paper, decision that anyone can grab and say, this is a decision. We follow on that. So in a way, if you would ask the governments, they would probably say, all this multi-stakeholderism is nice for consultations, but we need to bring decisions, and we would do it much more practically if it would be in the conventional government's intergovernmental system rather than this one. Now I'm again playing a devil's advocate, and Paul, I expect you to jump in and fight back.
But I could also say it goes against the collaborative spirit of working together. If you have a top-down institution trying to regulate something that affects network operators, let's take data protection or net neutrality regulation. Does that regulation affect network operators at the end of the day? Your bottom line as well, the return on investment? Certainly. It's not a question, I think, that you can avoid discussion, but the IGF, or the Internet Governance Forum, is only 10 years old. So we have this multi-stakeholder mechanisms to discuss policy issues which are actually just a decision-shaping discussions. They're not decision-making discussions, and maybe governments would like to, go to a meeting and say, yes, I've signed this decree, I've done something. There's a paperwork trail that I've been really useful. However, I do think we're going to see a proliferation of principles that are being made, like a Net Mundial, a meeting really did deliver something. We have now principles that most of the governments and other stakeholders, civil society, technical community, academia have signed up for. So I can see we have now a model that's working, and it's certainly difficult for network operators to pay so much attention and to follow all these processes just Paul talked about. And so when we have people traveling around the world and discussing policies, it's a capacity building process. We need to get new people in. We need to inform them what the debate's risks are. I'll stop here since Jan is back.
Yes, okay. I hear what you say, but my question was, for the operator, if the governance and internet politics people decide something, how will this change the way that the operator is building and running the network? Will this change his work in any way? Will this affect the operator's work in any way? I don't know, with network neutrality, with all this stuff. How does this actually shows up in the real world of internet?
Okay, I can answer, but let's go back to the panel.
Do you want to answer that?
I'm going back to some practical examples again. Business services, for example, zero data in Slovenia. We had, when the telecom operator offered zero data and the regulation came back and said, no, you cannot offer that service. I don't know how it's affecting the budget, but I think it's very simple to understand that regulation means a change of business case.
Very, very good question, Jan. That's a very good question. I'm going to attempt to give you my perspective on that. Currently, you have a lot of issues that are resolved in the telecommunications space, not the internet space, through what we call the ITU. Everybody knows what that body is. When those countries subscribe to what they have to do in that kind of a UN process, they must come home and a portion of the agreed bits for how telecommunications are run must come into the regulation of a country, okay? Currently, the internet is not in that space. So if you're asking me how it will impact you, if all of this, internet governance was to sit inside the ITU, just for example, when your country, Slovenia, goes to the UN and goes through the processes of the ITU and how they make their decisions, and a decision is made, and Slovenia needs to reinforce that, of course there are interpretations on how you bring that into your country. That is very true. But there are some interpretations that cannot be made. They must be followed. And people are called out on that. It adds a complexity that could create much damage for your business. So if your business doesn't have the right relations with its local government in what you're feeding them so that they understand technically what they need to do to go and make those decisions, you're doing yourself a very big disservice, in my opinion. And this is the reason why I called for locally for our LIRs and the technical community to have those nice ties. I'm very happy that Martin has come as an example saying Czech Republic's on this. And I can tell you, when I go to these meetings, these UN forums, and I see these countries talking, some countries have different perspectives on this, in, for instance, Africa or in the Middle East on what they want to see inside of development of the internet. It might not mesh with European values or the way we want to run our networks. And it's very funny to see those informed governments grab those microphones and shoot down the line what they see happening there. Let's not forget, Jan, governments run like businesses. They are competitors with each other in each other's countries, like you are a competitor with your networks inside Slovenia. And I'm so surprised how many governments from the right region actually come up to me and say, for instance, I'll just use an example. Sweden. What's going on in Norway, Paul? Oh, what do you mean what's going on in Norway? What's going on there? From the perspective of our business, they're very interested. They want to get the edge on what's happening. They need to. I think it's a survival for the ICT development, right? Moving in this kind of channel. I don't think we can escape this now. We have to work with them. We have no choice. So if you don't play that cooperative game, you might end up with regulation that comes from a body that's formed somewhere that's actually not going to work for you, is it? right? And will hurt your bottom line. So that's the answer to your question, I think.
Paul, thank you for this very, very good answer. It's simple, and I think operators now understand it. And so I urge, I'm talking to the operators in the room now, please get involved, dedicate some of your time to understand this stuff, because as you heard, this is actually affecting your business.
We have Vlada would like to comment, and it would be nice to hear from Serbia, for example, our needs, how they see their role and role of technical community in the internet governance discussion.
Come on, Serbia, give it to us. Thanks, Des. Well, putting off my government hat and just more as academia, 3 examples is probably the direct response. One is net neutrality. So we have the problem of or the option of telecom operators deciding what and how of the traffic will go to the end users, if it is going to be charged, slowed down, and so on. On the national level, we actually have the telcos which have an interest to raise their revenues with new models, which is zero rating as well, offering Facebook or whatever within the package for free. On the other hand, we have regulators and governments which have the responsibility to protect public interest and be able to allow access to all the content and all the information to everyone. So you have this battle between the regulators and telcos. On a national level, it's encouraged to have a communication on that. But if you raise it on a regional level, in Europe, for instance, you have a European telecom package, which might actually impose what the governments and regulators in certain countries do, regardless of what you actually discuss with them as telecom operators. So you have to be on the regional level as well. You have the US model, which even though is back there in the US, impacts the trends also in Europe politically and across the world. So you also have to follow what's happening in the US when it comes to net neutrality. Lastly, on the top level, on the global level, you had the WCIT, which we mentioned, where actually there were discussions about net neutrality as well. And the paradox is that the ETNO, the European Telecommunication Association, was trying to push within the UN, within the ITU framework, kind of a protection measure for governments not to be able to impose net neutrality rules to the telecom sector. So you also have to be on the global level. Now, obviously, the telecoms cannot be everywhere, but there are associations, RIPES, and so on, how you can get together. But any of these levels can actually impact your work, even the revenue. The second good example is cybersecurity. On a national level, on one hand, you have to share the information about the risks and incidents that you survive as telecom operators, because this helps the security of the state or the network and so on. But on the other hand, if you share it, or if you're a corporation, if you share the risks, incidents you had, you might lower the trust of your users. So you have to find a model how you're going to share this information in a kind of secure way for you, so that the trust in your services is not put down. Lastly, data protection and privacy. Do you want to have a system where the government or the Secret Service cannot just knock on the door and say, I need the data about users that you have, because if you give that data out, your users are going to lose trust in you as well. And you have that on a national level, you have on a regional level, Council of Europe, European Court of Justice, discussing the Google disclosure of documents and so on, or private data. You have the Human Rights Council on the UN level. So all these national, regional level can actually impact your work very directly. I hope this also gives an idea.
Thank you, Vlada.
Dusan Stoičević, I'm coming from RANIDS. This is one multi-stakeholder organization in Serbia. So I will ask Vlada, when you put hat on, did you talk about these security systems that Snowden described, or something like that? I'm not familiar with those security systems of governments. So let me try to explain the situation in Serbia that you were asking about. In Serbia, we were forming a RSNOG last year, also like Slovenia, and we are in talks with government, with our ministry, regularly, on regular basis, and I will tell you one simple story. You know, we are, as a Serbia, we are part of Europe, but not part of European Union. So we are currently in negotiations with the European Union, and our government, and I was thanking them to that, involved civil society and the large community in this negotiation process. And among them, we were the organization that was involved in one chapter of these negotiations, Chapter 10 for telecommunications, internet, and media. So we are working with our government, and there is no problem to work with them. There is a problem with understanding of internet governance in a way that you described. What is internet governance and who take which part of it?
Thank you so much, Dusan, for that insight. It's good to know. Paul?
I have a question for you, Dusan. So your organization, is everyone here in this room familiar with your organization? Is it open? Are you inclusive to include others when you actually go to speak to government?
Yes, as I said, we are a multi-stakeholder organization, so we include everyone. Everybody can join our organization. There are rules and everything, policies, but you can join.
You can join for free?
There are rules. So.
Okay, I think we need to put a bit of pressure on Dusan here, but okay.
Conditions to be a member.
Yes, okay.
I think. But a question, I think, are there any more questions? Maybe they'll come up in the course of a discussion. Is how do you follow, or if you're a network operator or if you're busy doing your daily job, how can you follow all of these? And do you need to? What are your resources, networks? What really happens? What would be the good way to think about this if you don't have enough time to dedicate to this?
Can I take a stab at that? You know, to be honest with you, I spend most of my time on this, and I feel like I'm struggling to keep up. So I'm not expecting operators in this room to all of a sudden run and play the internet governance global game. I think that would be quite naive to think in that space. As I said, and I wanted to reiterate that because I think, again, good governance starts at home. And I think if the community here works together in a nice way with their government, I think you'll be you'll do yourselves far more service than if you're trying to figure out what's going on in that whole global puzzle. There are a lot of organizations out there, the ISTAR organizations like Internet Society, right, NCC, the RIRs, and other players that probably have a little bit more of a global view and can give you a summary of that, so you can look into that window and see whether or not you're happy with that space, and of course raise your voice into any one of the particular areas. I think what's important is that you need to focus on what you think is important for you and your business and your country and the development of your IT sector in your country, and take that piece and run with that. don't try to get involved into every single bit of the internet governance. It's impossible. I mean, if I look at just, for instance, Desiree and Vlada, I'm actually very honored to be here in their country, actually, because for years I've worked with these guys on the global stage at very different areas. We come from different walks of life, different parts of internet administration or what have you. They're both very talented and they're both very committed people. And it's nice to see us on their home turf actually talking about these things that they're actually that are quite precious to them when they're out there fighting this on the global scene. I think you Serbs have got two very great voices out there on the global scene. I think you need to look at how you will put yourselves together here and look at things locally. I think that's very important these days.
Thank you, Paul. Right, are there more comments or questions?
Mitja, from Telekom Slovenia. So we saw a lot of acronyms here. It's hard for us, for providers, for operators, to understand all of those acronyms, and even it's hard to create a business model. If you are present in the different countries, each country has a different legislation. It's hard to create a different the business case, because as you mentioned, in Slovenia we have the zero data, which is only in Slovenia, in this region. So if we need to have the same business model with the country which we are present in the ex-Yugoslavian territory, we need to have a totally different concept. And it's hard to create a single business model for the whole company, for instance.
Yes. So one of the way of addressing these actually internet governance questions is to have the widespread representation of stakeholders, rather interested parties, be it civil society, NGOs, technical community, academia, private sector, international organizations, and governments coming together at a local level. So I think what we have currently is this Internet Governance Forum that takes place on an annual basis that try to convene a global discussion. But what has been a proof of that success, that many regional IGF forums have come out of that process. So we have Eurodig taking place in Sofia on 3rd and 4th of June, which is the European instance of the IGF, where the local issues, so think globally but act locally, trying to understand what are the pressing points in the local region like Serbia. And I think although this multi-stakeholder framework is very familiar to a very small crowd of people that go to these events, it is a term that needs, I think, wider understanding. Whether it means you run a meeting with open door policy, that means anyone can walk in and they may have something to contribute or they may not. We know that governments do not run the open door policy meetings. So if you hear something, you cannot make a comment and you cannot participate on an equal footing. The danger or the risk that I see of the multi-stakeholder model in the future is going to be, if it gets enforced in an ideal way, how the WSIS Tunis agenda has set it up, where all the stakeholders have different roles, it may become a very bureaucratic process that at every stage of policy-making development you have to hear from all the stakeholders that are around that sometimes may not have an opinion or an expertise to participate. So there is a need for flexibility in that system and making it very bureaucratic. We've seen that in some climate change studies on multi-stakeholderism. It's not a new thing that is just that has come up with the internet governance. It exists in other spheres and domains of UN policy.
Thank you very much, Desiree, for that comment, because earlier on in my presentation, I talked about what multi-stakeholder means to the RIPE community, or how the RIPE NCC views the word multi-stakeholder. It's a tough one. I don't really like the word personally myself. Do we work in a multi-stakeholder environment? Yes, we do. Is RIPE and RIPE NCC multi-stakeholder? Well, my definition of multi-stakeholder is bottom-up, open, and inclusive. And I think that that means that anybody who feels they need to be part of this consensus-making process that we have is able to come to the table. That doesn't mean that we have a seat reserved for government, for somebody from civil society, or what have you. And some people want to enforce this kind of governance. I think we need to stick to bottom-up, open and inclusive, which we've been doing for the last 25 years, and it's served us very nicely. So, thank you. That's my vision on multi-stakeholder.
Thank you for drawing that point. We have a new comment or a question.
May I make some comment? Dmitry Burkov, Russia. Paul Desiree, it's a pleasure to hear you and your definition of multi-stakeholderism. But in my opinion, my personal opinion and my experience for last more than 10, maybe 15 years, this approach was formed as a potential alternative to United Nations approach. But, the term bottom-up was stolen from us. I want to remind you that because it's a Dutch principle. Dutch principle, when we all together, we depend on our neighbor. We should pump water to keep dry our terrain. And it's not really now happened in multi-stakeholderism. It's absolutely different. Because, for example, now we are still slightly naive as ISPs. For 30 years, for me it's for 30 years, now we're simply interested only to protect our economical interest. And from government, please don't touch us. We want to follow the same as 20 years ago. Nothing more, seriously. As a citizens, we expect that government will protect and provide better services. The cost of ICT services from government will be cheaper, but it's not the way, really. Is it cheaper? Is it more flexible? Is it more safe? What you will discuss here in the European Union, if it's even because even without Snowden revelations, it was well known from 2008 that all our data in pockets of NSA. Read FISA, Foreign Intelligence Security Act, because any data accessible to US services from any US-related company. It's a well-known fact. It's a legal way. And after that, we are in strange Strauss position here that we discuss, oh, we protect here. But all of us use Microsoft, Apple, Google, all our data, our personal data, in one pocket. Who cares? We escaped these issues. But what's I appreciated to Diplo Foundations because last IGF you tried, as some tried, to raise the point of real issues, what we can discuss on a global level. It's real transborder issues, real fragmentation which already happen on economical level. Please understand, I don't believe in any future of world governance, even in multi-stakeholder form. And we should take attention to most real problems. Because all this issue, I don't know what's behind the border. It's a transborder issues. It's a real fragmentation of internet which already happened. And what we should be care to keep, still to keep, and to transform our experience for more than 30 years to keep the world united to something else. Thank you.
And do you think that network operators are key to that action?
Oh, it's just because even if we were among the pioneers 30 years ago, it doesn't mean that we should try to protect our glade in the forest and think that we are fully isolated. It's not true. And I fully agree with you and that we should see on this world differently, but define the real problems, not idealistic approach. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Michael, Vlado, you had a response to that?
Well, kind of building up on that, but before that, since we mentioned a couple of times fragmentation of the internet, the very commonly used term is balkanization. And I kindly ask us all to fight strongly against that. Because for many reasons, firstly, Balkans deserves a second chance, and secondly, even conceptually, it's a totally different use. So let's unite on that and fight against the term balkanization, at least in negative term. We might set it up as a positive term of cooperation and so on. I actually wanted to kind of throw a ball to Desiree's ground. I think all these discussions about multi-stakeholderism, whatever we define them, boil down to trust. And that's something that's diminishing with a large or fast pace on the internet. There is fewer and fewer trust of users in corporate sector because of net neutrality, because of data protection, because of surveillance even. There is fewer and fewer trust from users in governments, again because of surveillance and these kind of things. Losing the trust in the internet actually causes a damage to all of us, and even your operational models. That's something that's, I think, in the ground of all of that. If you look at a triangle in a way, where in one corner you have governments, in the other you have business, and the third one you have users. You have to have all these three parts of the triangle involved in order to keep the trust among each other. Without that, and I think that's useful argument even when discussing to governments, because politically they might lose trust from the both corporate sector and users and their constituencies, voters. So they have to include all these in policies about the internet. But I think Desiree is much more versed in the trust issues.
Well, thank you for that compliment. I'll take it. I'm doing currently a study on trust because starting point is that the way how internet is run, definitely there will be an issue rising on the horizon how internet is governed. Therefore, all these internet governance organizations will come to be inspected with much bigger lenses. But that's another topic for another discussion, so I'll stop here. Are there any more final comments before we wrap up the session? There's Jan there standing.
Thank you. So Vlada, with this Balkanization of the internet, I'm completely with you. We should fight against the usage of this word. And as a joke, some time ago somebody asked me if I know what is the Balkanization of the internet. I said, dude, I was born there.
So I think the term is reserved only for people living on the Balkans. They can use it and abuse it. With that, I would really like to come up to the end of the session and maybe ask Vlada first if he's got any final thoughts, and Paul, and also first if any one of you would like to make any final comments or questions for either Paul, Vladimir, or myself. I must say you've been a very patient audience going through this internet governance salad. So Vladimir, yes, you'd like to go ahead?
Thanks. I was actually looking at them and no one fell asleep, so that's quite a good signal. They're working on the computers, but that's fine. That's something we allow. No, on Balkanization, let's actually try to make it a positive example. Let's try to make it an example of cooperation in Balkans, which can then go beyond. So that might be a good challenge. As a final thought of how do we go ahead, and a couple of suggestions for technical community in general, how to get involved on a global level. Paul already mentioned the local level. The CCTLDs, the country code top level, the main managers are already quite well organized within Center in Europe and other associations. So use that. The NOGs on the national level, the network operator groups, and maybe on the regional level should be enforced. Business in general is mostly gathered within the International Chamber of Commerce. So use this channel if you need as kind of a business grouping. The technical community is very active in ISOC, Internet Society. We have a chapter here, there are other chapters in the region. There is a great activity of global ISOC, so use that as a channel to send your message to global and regional discussions. I mentioned that, and I mean it. The governments have missions around the world. Unfortunately, the mission, especially of small countries and developing countries, do not have capacities to deal with all these things. Take an example of a mission in Geneva, which has to deal with environment, migrations, economic issues, trade, intellectual property rights, and cyber somewhere over there. And that's one person usually. So we need to somehow help them, or let them help us help them in a way, to provide feedbacks to raise capacities of the ministries as well, to be able to present the country somewhere over there. And then Paul mentioned there are a lot of individuals in our countries which are actually in some NGOs, technical community, here and there, very highly positioned in global structures. Use them, find them, make kind of a grouping on a national level. And the last thought is capacity building. We mentioned that. I think it goes beyond trainings. We're not talking about a training. We're talking about capacity building as a process, which means understanding the acronyms that we mentioned and what is it all about. By the way, we have some acronym glossary. I forgot it, so I'll bring it tomorrow, which might help about IG. Understanding, but then also researching and building own opinions about all these policy issues, and then being able to engage and actually raise a hand and say, listen, I think this and that. And one particular aspect of capacity building that I think we are missing, we've been dealing a lot with training governments, diplomats, to understand technical aspects more and multi-stakeholder aspects. I find it missing to also work with technical community to understand diplomats and policymakers and policy processes more. Not all of the technical community, but at least those that have time and will be involved in the global processes. Opt for balkanization in a positive way.
Okay, thank you, Vlada. Paul?
Thanks, Desiree. Vlada's really stolen a lot of my thunder. I think that you need to find your interest inside of internet governance and where your expertise can be used. That's something that I want to add maybe to his bit on looking at things locally. I think everyone can see inside their own countries that the internet is big enough, and the whole governance issue inside your own country is probably big enough that you don't need to be worrying about what's going on the global scale. But there are ways you can get into the global scale by using your folks that are connected there. Vlada and Desiree are two people that are great for this, for Serbia, for instance. The other thing I wanted to say is that be smart. Those of you that have the technical expertise, get on the government delegations. Isn't that cool? I'm looking around this room right now, and I know that there are about 3 of you that have been on government delegations where I've gone to UN meetings, and I've seen ripe technical community people sitting with the delegation of their government. How cool is that, right? Get right in there, you know what I mean, and influence it that way. So maybe you need to look, if we look at Serbia here, because we are here on your soil, of course, if you look at your own technical community, find those smart individuals that have those technical skills, work together and get them onto the government delegations. That's where you will come out the winner with influence. Thank you.
Thank you for all these salient points, how to get engaged and how to actually get the resources used. So I would just go back and say use Paul. Anytime you can get hold of his precious time as well. And the idea is that we all are working on the same issues, and more informed and more information we exchange about the processes and the space, and we have a vision where we'd like to go ahead. We're making a step at a time, and there is this precious meeting in December with this 10+ review. So it would be good in all our regions here in the Southeastern Europe to get involved with the government delegations and with Internet Society chapters and with RIPE LARs, and to get some salient point as to what is really needed for ICT development, that we move out away from unnecessary politics and get down to action, because it's been missing. With that, I'd like you to also thank our panelists here and yourself, and thank you very much for your patience. Hope to see you at the next Internet Governance panel somewhere.